Welcome everybody today to the Griot Collective. We are interviewing my friend here, Olu, and he is going to tell us more about his journey in genealogical research and ancestry. And we're going to get down to the nitty gritty about it. We have so many stories to tell, so I love having this opportunity to do so with amazing people who've done amazing research. So go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
So please, thankful to be a part of this. My name is Olu Ashe, born and raised Houston, Texas. I've been an independent researcher for well over a decade now. I'm a part of different collectives, co-founder of the Ashe Project, which is a community-based organization based out of Houston, Texas. Now we're in the process of doing some moving around, so we look to branch out to more cities throughout the U.S. and hopefully throughout the diaspora. I'm also a member of the Street Sufis, which is also a team of independent researchers that deal with science and spirituality. I'm also an MC poet, historian. Got a lot of hashes on there, so we'll just say I'm a multi-hyphenated individual. That about sums it up.
I feel that most of us are. When you call to do work, a lot of us have to wear many hats to do it.
True.
But welcome. So, jumping right into it, how did you become interested in genealogical research and ancestry?
So, since a small kid, I can remember when oftentimes we have these questions about our blackness in the structure of the U.S. When asking questions about our ancestry, we'll hear things like, well, we don't know exactly where in Africa our ancestors came from. So this is the reason why we're called black, right? Because we can look at a lot of different shades of our people, and although they have some that are of darker hues, in the grand scheme of things, we're different shades of brown, right? So when we ask this question, I'm a person that when I have a question, I go seek an answer. And if I feel like that answer isn't sufficient, I document that information, but I keep looking. And with this genealogy, it starts with just the people that you doesn't have to use. Sometimes we want to take these grand leaps to find the furthest thing, and it takes a different amount of work doing that because of our condition in the U.S. There isn't a lot of documentation on those that were enslaved. A lot of times you just find age, sex, and how much they were sold for. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
times. So I've always had a desire to know more about myself because I come from schools of thought that teach about knowledge of self. And a lot of times that knowledge of self is often things based in a collective sense. And I believe that if you're going to say that you have to have knowledge of self, then you need to know more about yourself as well in the process. So,
Mm-hmm.
and that plays a part into ancestry. When I did my ancestry test, I had already had an ancestry account from like 2009. I didn't do an actual DNA test until late 2016, 2017. And throughout that process and with the updates that have been presented, a lot of the information that I was able to gather on my own while studying about the regions that were attributed to my ancestry have shown to be in fact and right and exact.
We're gonna get more into those results later on,
Hmm.
and go over what you found and what you've done with that. But bring it to more about you. So, where and when were you born? And has your family always lived in that region, or was there a migration there with your parents and they were
Right.
from somewhere else?
So I was born in Houston, Texas, August 8th, 1986. My dad was born in Louisiana. So a lot of my paternal ancestry or the recent paternal ancestry comes out of Louisiana, Mississippi, and the Carolinas, North and South Carolina. My paternal on my mom's side, there's been on her dad's side, there's ancestry in Alabama, the Carolinas as well, Georgia, Mississippi, and then I have extended roots in California. So my mom was born in Houston, and then when my grandmother moved to California, she migrated with them. And then eventually she ended up coming back, which is how her and my dad met. My dad was born in Shreveport. My mom was born in Houston. When she came back, interestingly, my uncle peace be upon him, he passed, Marvin Latrice.
Hmm.
He was the person that introduced my dad to my mom. So I always tell my cousin, man, you just don't realize how thankful I am for Uncle Marvin for introducing my parents. I could say it seemed predestined in a lot of ways just because of the things of our ancestry that are similar and different and how those things connected. This gave me real deep Southern roots. I don't have the history of free blacks in the North like some do. And I
Hmm.
think that a lot of times that plays a part into our perspective of our placement and when we talk about African ancestry. So my paternal and maternal lineage is byproducts of the migrations by choice and by force in the southern US.
That's interesting. And you mentioned your father's family more being from Louisiana. So,
Mm.
just as a question, because this always comes up, does that automatically link you to any type of Creole or Cajun ancestry, or is he just African black and that's Louisiana black?
So when I've looked into the history or the available history of my family from what I've seen, it places some of my ancestors into the Afro Creole range. These aren't, I don't have a lot of French ancestry or the Acadian ancestry that would make someone Cajun, but I do have ancestry from the groups, the French speaking groups that were brought to Louisiana. Like when you look at Senegalese or the Wolof people, when you see the Benin ancestry, when it comes to the Aja, the Ewe, and the Fan, a lot of these groups they come from francophone countries being colonized by the French and then being brought to the States. So it's honestly is an interesting mix of varying black communities because they come from the northwestern region of Louisiana. From what I've been able to discover so far, it's more so of an Afro Creole thing, like French speaking people of African descent, rather than someone who may be mixed with a European French person or a white French person. I have Gullah Geechee ancestry. Some of my ancestors also fit into the Piney Woods, I guess you would say, Piney Woods community. Those that came out of Mississippi and Arkansas and then came into Eastern Texas, where they were not necessarily isolated, but separated in the wooded areas of certain parts of Texas.
Mm.
So it's interesting to see that. And I've been learning more about the Creole history. The funny thing is, I believe that when we deal with our family's history, sometimes when we think about the marriages and the cousins that we have through marriage, right? I remember growing up and my cousins would have nicknames or they would nickname their kids certain names that I just thought were interesting, but come to find out they're related to the Corivini language, the Creole language, where you have names like Tutu and Nunu and things of that nature. So it's interesting to see how these things intersect because Texas has always had an interconnected relationship with Louisiana,
Hmm.
especially come when you're dealing with Houston. Houston has a lot of people that migrated from Louisiana and they've been there since I was a kid. So I know that they were there beforehand. My grandfather and my grandmother, my paternal grandfather and grandmother were both from Shreveport and they met in Houston. So that was an interesting thing in itself. So
That was interesting. I didn't know about those different communities. That was interesting information, especially since I did in my own research trace some lines. They were actually sold through Mexico into Louisiana, but they were noted as coming from Sierra Leone. And I didn't think about those different communities because when I started to try to look for the matriarch who I found, she was the earliest one. When I started to try to look for her, because at some point she bought her and her brother's freedom, but her daughter had already been sold before then. But she brought her and her brother's freedom. I never knew where to even start looking.
mhm.
And so that's an interesting piece of information that you do have these community hubs that are not talked of, who do have these ethnic grouping background and are places of refuge for people like that back then who bought their freedom and now they're free in Louisiana and need somewhere safe to be. That's interesting. And that's also a good point to help people who are trying to figure stuff out like I am. Like, that might be a good looking point. That might be a good focal point for research to look into these different communities and see if I could just find her or somebody related to her in these areas that I have not looked into. So
No, for
thank you for that. I know it probably helps some other people too who have traced genealogy to there and then poof, their ancestors just disappeared. They don't know where to go. So, are there any conflicting family stories that you've tried to make sense of?
So, yes. So, just like most black people in the US, especially in the South, we hear these tales of someone being full-blooded Native American or half Native or whatever the case may be. It may even be things like Irish ancestry or Scottish or whatever the case may be. So, I had often heard the Cherokee narrative. And so, my cousin and I were both doing the family history for our paternal side. And in the process, while going through documents, I was able to find correspondences with our two-time great grandmother and the Department of Interior for Indian Territory, for the places like Oklahoma, parts of Louisiana, and I want to say it goes into certain parts of Texas. And it gets tricky when you go into this information because now once I access the enrollment numbers, like this is the thing that you need to be able to check and verify how your ancestors identify themselves. This is one thing to say that you have a biological tie to an ethnic group or a nation of people, and then there are cultural ties. A lot of what's being spoken on is dealing with cultural ties, and those are important, but they are vastly different than a biological tie. So, out through finding my two-time great grandmother Amy's enrollment request for her children, which would have been my great grandfather and his siblings, who is my grandfather's father, I was able to see her father give accounts of how he was enslaved by what he labeled a white Choctaw, which was a man named Lorenzo Harris. Lorenzo Harris was married to a woman named Sarah, and Sarah was the sister of one of their chiefs named Peter Pitchling. I forget the Choctaw name he had, but it said that he and his mother were enslaved by Lorenzo Harris, and that Amy's mother was her mother and her parents were enslaved by someone I believe named Bert Wilson.
Hmm.
So in this paperwork, it shows they're seeking adoption or enrollment into the Choctaw Nation. And when it asks, were you emancipated in this land that you're now in? Some of our ancestors, once emancipated, they didn't leave these territories.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have remained in direct contact with the people that formerly enslaved them, but a lot of them still remained in places like Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
So that in itself was able to clarify some of the concepts. Because if you tell me this person was Cherokee, but this documentation say they were actually in Choctaw territory, enslaved by the Choctaw, and I actually have a cousin that I found through Ancestry who has 15% Native or Indigenous North American ancestry. So that means that the line that she comes from actually dealt biologically with the Choctaw. I don't have that percentage.
Mm-hmm.
So at best, I could say that my ancestors were simply Choctaw freedmen rather
Mm.
than biologically Choctaw.
That's a very important conclusion to draw, especially with the increase of, I don't want to say appropriation, but misinformation
Mm,
concerning the African American relationship with Native or Indigenous heritage. Like you said, a lot of us have been told that we have full-blooded such and such. And when we go down that road and
Hmm.
really look for it, even in my case, I had that on my Gullah Geechee side. No, come
Mm.
on. But that was a story that they told. It made it to my generation. And so now that I'm looking and I'm trying to find out this exact person who they're talking about, that man was not Indian. He was or Native American. He was light skinned with long hair because he was the product of massa. That had nothing to do with Native American. And we get these, and even in your case where it was just it was a cultural connection. It
Mm-hmm.
was not by blood. You can claim it
Mm-hmm.
because you have rights to it because of what your ancestors went through, but they are not blood tied related. We don't have any claims to that specific heritage. We have claims to the freedman heritage that comes
Mm-hmm.
along with that. Not
Right.
saying that there aren't people who are Native Americans. I have 2% that shows up in my blood. It's just not from the ancestor that they swore up and down was it. The 2% comes from my mom's side, not my dad's side. So we have to look at these things objectively. Even when you find those documents, you really have to look and see what they're actually saying. And like you mentioned, we do have those who have more of a connection. You have more of a biological lineage to trace concerning it. But in most of our cases, it's not one that's significant. And
Right.
even in those cases where it's like you have this whole line, 9 times out of 10, if you look like me, you got about 16 other ones that don't look nothing like that. So
Mm-hmm. Right.
it's like we still have to keep these things in perspective. We have to look at the entire picture while we're doing this research, taking what our ancestors told us and verifying and finding the core to it. Because some of it is lost in translation. They saw this light skinned person with long hair in these pictures, and they're automatically saying, oh, he's Choctaw.
Right.
No, he's mixed.
I think sometimes we lose sight of the genetic diversity of African people and what that looks like when we come in contact with other groups of people. If there are some people, let's say, if you take a person that has 100% African ancestry and you take a person that has 100% European ancestry, all those kids are not going to look alike.
Mm-hmm.
You may have some of those kids that they may phenotypically look Spanish or Latin. You may have some that they have darker complexions to where they may look like somebody from Belize. It may
Mm-hmm.
look it's because there's no prototype for what this mixed ancestry looks like. And
Right.
I think that sometimes when we look at our families, like I said, I have a cousin who has 15% of this indigenous American ancestry that I don't have. That's still my cousin.
Mm-hmm.
We still share ancestors. We just don't share that ancestor. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's when we go into the ebb and flow of having an understanding of how to look at things both collectively and individually. It's no way to just, you can't just throw a blanket over this. My parents are my parents, my cousin's parents are their parents, and what we share is based on our related parents, the
Mm-hmm.
parents that are siblings.
Mm-hmm.
But you still carry DNA from your mother or father, wherever that separation may exist.
Right.
So when we get a grasp on that, we'll have a better understanding of how to actually identify these things.
Facts. And that's one of the things I preach, especially when getting into the back and forth on these here internets. I really direct people back to their own tree.
Mm-hmm.
Don't come trying to tell me about mine. I'm not going to tell you about yours. If you want to
Right.
show it, we can discuss it. But don't come tell me who I am
Exactly.
based on what you think. Mind your tree. We can talk about it as a collective, but at the same time, like you said, there does need to be a level of understanding that individuals have different things and nothing is going to be blanket when we discuss these things. Even with cousins, it's not going to be the same because you don't share exact same parents. So that's very good points there. So, do you know of any ancestors who were particularly influential or respected in your tree?
So at this current time, I would say that the most influential ancestor that I know of is Albert Perry. Albert Perry is my fourth-time maternal great grandfather. He is the man that scientists discovered, or they labeled him as I believe they call him the second Adam. He is where the A00 haplogroup has derived from in the U.S. It is primarily found in Cameroon, in the Shumlaka region of Cameroon. Is tied to the Imbo ethnic group, but there are multiple, and if I'm not mistaken, some of these ethnic groups and their terms are usually umbrellas. They're usually multiple groups that fit underneath this one term. So some of those groups are like the Bangwa, the Bakosi, the Bafar, Benileke, and you also find groups like Takar that are associated with the Imbo. But when so my cousin, my distant cousin, had a PBS special done. Now, mind you, a lot of this information I just found out this year based on going down this lineage because this lineage is connected to my mom's biological father. He is someone who I didn't know a whole lot about. So while doing genealogy on her father's side, I reached out to a brother of mine who is in Sierra Leone. He's originally from the U.S., but he repatriated to Sierra Leone, and he does the genealogy as well. And so I sent him a few names, and less than a day, he sent me pictures of my second great grandmother. She is the one that was born in Alabama. And then it eventually led to my three-time great grandfather, Clyde Perry. Clyde is was Clyde migrated from South Carolina to Hearne, Texas. Hearne, Texas is outside of Killeen, and it's through his lineage that I'm connected to Albert Perry. And it's been interesting to see because when I looked at my ancestry results and I saw I had Cameroonian lineage, I started to say, well, a lot of times we talk about our West African ancestry by being African Americans or Black Americans, but we don't really hear much discussion on the Central African ancestry. And when you deal with people who came from places like Angola and the Congo, Cameroon, places like that. So when I found out that at the time it was just a name on paper, Albert Perry to me at that time was just a name on paper. And then I started going online and started seeing discussions about Albert Perry. And hold on, are we talking about the same person? Like, is this the same person we're talking about? I started seeing a lot of misinformation online about him based on him being in America, born in 1827 in South Carolina. There are some reports that say he was born in Florida, but there's only one document that says that he was born in Florida. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the death certificate of Clyde that says that his father was born in South Carolina. I mean, born in
Mm,
everything else says South Carolina. A lot of
mm,
the information points back to South Carolina. And seeing as though the A haplogroup or A00 has been something that is a scientific breakthrough because it changed the scope of who scientists would say that men share their paternal DNA with. So far, you have A1B, A00, but that A haplogroup in general is typically associated with people who come out of that region of Africa, which would be Cameroon. So at the most, I know that if not his grandparents, more than likely were the people that came from that region. But because he was an enslaved man and I was actually able to find the documents on his enslavement, that has been my primary dig of the moment. We got a lot of scientific information on him and they've been able to trace the lineage back, but they've been able to do all this and no one can identify his parents. There's no other information that's being readily found. And what I was able to find Just even how he got the name Perry. He was enslaved by a man named J.A. Perry. And if I'm not mistaken, my conclusion is that he was willed and given to the son or a relative of a man named Archibald Simpson Perry. All these people are Europeans. And if you go on Ancestry and look at certain genealogical trees, you'll see that they try to attribute J.A. Perry as being the father of Albert Perry, which we know was impossible. When I looked through the census records, I had to look at his. So one way to verify if the person you're seeing on a census record is the person that you're looking at in your tree is to look at their age and to look at the county or the area they may have been in. And so since his attributed year of birth was 1827, when I went through the records of J.A. Perry, I found a black male, age 33, in 1860 through the 1860 census. That was the only 33-year-old black male that was listed in those records. So it automatically deduced it to being okay, well, now that's been my current brick wall is getting beyond 1827. I got a time frame to work with. Now I also have some ancestors who their birth frame is 1800s, early 1800s, but I haven't got into the 1700s yet. And I believe that once I do get into the 1700s, this is where I will start finding documents or manifests from ships and these
Mhm.
people being offboarded or names being changed or where you find the locations they were taken from. Places like slavevoyages.org. It's controversial for some because they don't want to really look through those documents, but they have documentation from the 1500s all the way up to the 1800s, and it deals with the UK, it deals with the Caribbean, South America, and people that were brought to the US. And the National Archives is a great resource to use when delving into this information because what a lot of people may not know is that because the United States didn't exist as a concept or as a country until 1776, all the information prior to that is going to be in the National Archives UK. So you have to access the National Archives UK to be able to see things prior to the 1800s in a lot of instances when it comes to some of our ancestors. So yes, Albert Perry will most definitely be the most reputable ancestor that I've located at this time.
That is amazing. That's a great find, scientific, groundbreaking, and a good link to finding out more.
Hmm.
Oh, I know brick walls can be, they can keep you crying all night. They are horrible. I do hope that you get past it. That was a good tip about knowing who to look for. 'Cause you said a lot of our ancestors were here, but they're not going to be in the archives for the US because the US didn't exist. I know when I was looking for some Louisiana, the Louisiana ancestor I was talking about earlier, who was sold through Mexico,
Hmm.
their their records were actually with the French. They were with French New Orleans or something like that. But if you look just through American records, they're not going to be there. You have to go through this specific database to
Right.
find those records. So, like you said, keep your eyes up open for those databases, those keywords and phrases. Look at those last names and see if that territory, whose territory it was, and all that type of stuff, and then try to find those owners and manifest concerning those countries. That's a great tip. I don't think I've been giving anybody that advice. That's a good one.
That's because I think when the more I look through some of these records, it's a few things that always stood out to me. How generic some of these names are. If you're looking for Tom Smith, good luck. If you're looking for Mary Jones, good luck. the misspelling of names. I've seen multiple misspellings. On my maternal lineage, we have the McFarland surname, but there are a lot of different ways people spell McFarland. You have
Mm-hmm.
the E, then you have the MC, then you have McFarland with a D, then you have McFarlane with an E at the end. I've seen records of my ancestors, people that I actually knew, with misspelled names in records, and it's fairly common. I've been looking for different information on my great grandmother, Azzy Cole, and I didn't realize that that was a common name during the time that she was born. I've come across so many white Azzy Coles, it was ridiculous. But thankfully, knowing her, I know this is not this person. And being sure to look at counties, I never realized how counties a lot of times were used in the way that we use cities now. So I might go on a record and I'm looking for a relative within the grand uncle, relatives of my grandparents, and would see Waller, Texas. Well, Waller is a county. There is no Waller, Texas. Or looking or seeing Milam, Texas. And like, well, where is that at? And then finding out this is Hearn, Texas. Or seeing Harris, Texas. And that's Harris County. That could be
Yes.
Houston.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So
Mm-hmm.
being able to identify these varying descriptions in a lot of this paperwork is the thing that helps with genealogical research the most.
Mentioning counties, I had somebody drop a county line thing, and then they compared 25 county lines to 1870 county lines, and some of these county lines are totally different. So
Mhm.
that's something to look at too. Sometimes you have to go down even to the street addresses because these county
Definitely.
lines have changed. It might that the county that they're talking about might not even exist as it was back then anymore. So,
Hmm.
well, as you mentioned, looking at these details and trying to really understand what's written is very important in the research process. The time changes, and that even goes back to looking at our DNA test, which is our next question. But
Hmm.
looking at our DNA test and saying, oh, well, my ancestors came from Nigeria, Ghana, Mali, and all this. And it's like, but did they
Right.
came from that region, but the places that are on the map now did not exist. Where exactly are we talking about? Because that's how you can let people tear down your brick house
Hmm.
when you get deeper looking into finding people with different groups on their records. And it's like, well, I'm looking and I don't see this in my DNA chart, but you just don't know because when they
Right.
were there, it wasn't called this. They were
Right.
a defined group of people who lived in this area,
Mhm.
but now it's a part of Nigeria. Now it's a part of Mali. So looking at those different things are very important. Sometimes you have to go through the time machine and not think of it through a 2000s lens, but think of it through a 1870 lens and 1700 lens. Everything did not look the same. And if you don't look at those minute details and changes, it can get you turned around.